Hey guys, in the last video we covered generating a title using GPT based off the content of a blog post. And in this video we're going to cover generating a slug and generating a meta description for the blog post using GPT-3. So this is the functionality from the last video. We hit generate title and it's going to take the contents of this blog post that has to do with presenting portfolio projects, and it says creating an impactful developer portfolio for hiring managers and developers. I think that sounds a lot better than my current title, so I'm going to actually swap that out. And then a slug, we will generate that, and then it came up with dev portfolio impact hiring. That sounds pretty good to me. And now that we've generated the title and slug, we can generate a meta description, and a meta description is a little blurb that describes the blog post, and this will be included when you do a Google search for anything. Like if I just search, test, these are the meta descriptions right here. This is a meta description, and this is a title right there. All right. So now that we've got a meta description here, and if we want to try out another one, we just hit generate meta description, and it will take the blog post, send it, and now we've got a new meta description that we can use in our blog post. Okay, let's see how to add these two buttons. Now, all I'm doing here is just pretty much adding two more buttons. This is the title that we created in the last video, title button for the generate title, and I added two more buttons, a generate slug and a generate meta description, and we're just reusing that same input. So all these are just swapping out the input. Now for the generate slug, it's pretty much identical to this one in that the route is the same, the ID is a little bit different. The one unique aspect of the slug is that I'm using this HX include attribute, and the HX include attribute will allow you to target another, well, not target, but be able to use another element's text and include that in the HX request. So in this case, I'm using that input, and the reason I'm doing that is when I generate a slug, so let's go back to generating a title. And when I generate a slug, I don't want the slug to be based off the content because it might just create like a random slug. The slug should really be very close to the title. I think that's kind of the way I like it, is the URL of the website is very close to the title of the website. So when I hit this generate slug, the HX include is saying include this text in the HTMX post request, and that way the slug is based off of the title. So we're including that, we're including the content of this input right here, and then our generate meta description is pretty much exactly identical to the generate title. The only difference is going to be in our view. So these are nearly identical. Okay, let's jump over to the view to kind of see what's going on under the hood here. So this is the same. This is exactly the same from the last video. We're still doing the same completion code. The only difference is we now have some logic here of, is the trigger coming from the title button? Is the trigger coming from the generate slug button, or is the trigger coming from the meta description trigger? And in each of these, the logic's a little bit different. For instance, the prompt for generate slug is saying write a concise website slug based off this blog post title. And you can see that it's accessing this attribute of the post request. And we'll step through the code in just a second. I'll overview it, and then we'll go through an actual example of it working. And then what we're doing is using this slugify on the completion. So let's see, we're at 173. There's this Django tool called slugify, and it basically takes text and yeah, like it says here, convert spaces or repeated dashes to single dashes. So that way, whenever you generate a slug, it needs to have these little dashes in between it. And we get that by doing slugify. All right, so we're doing the slugify, and then the max tokens for a slug is generally, you want it to be about the same length as the title. It's basically kind of like the title, but without spaces. So we're limiting the input to 70 characters, and then we throw the completion in there. So let's actually step through what this would look like. I'm going to put a breakpoint on this generate slug trigger. And we've already got the title in here. So if we hit generate slug, we're now right here and it should step into it. Great. So it's hit that trigger and we're now within this logic. And if we open up the request and we take a look at the post and open this up a little bit, we can see that there is, go a little further, this GPT input. And GPT input has that title of creating a developer portfolio, motivating, and blah, 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 blah. And the reason that we have that GPT input is because let's go back over to, so you can tell that in the post request, there is a query dictionary that includes this GPT input, and that's what we're accessing right at the end here. We're accessing the request object, we're going into the post object, and then retrieving GPT input from the query dictionary. And that's because we did this HX include, and it's ID GPT input. It's just the way HTMX works. The entry in the dictionary will be based off the name, not the ID. So even though I'm targeting it based on the ID, you access it from the dictionary using the name attribute, and that's why it's called GPT input. Okay, so we're accessing this. So instead of accessing the blog content, we're accessing just the title that we generated earlier for the slug. And yep, we're going to go through, and I can just show you what the completion looks like before we slugify it. So actually, I've done it all in one go, so you're not going to be able to see it. But I guess you can trust me that the slugify is just going to add extra hyphens to or it's going to add hyphens where the spaces are. So I'm just going to take this off, hit play, and we can see that it's swapped it out for that slug. And I'll just briefly go over this one. I don't really need to step through it since it's almost identical to the generate title logic. But in this case, the one difference is the max token has changed because the meta description is longer than a title. So whereas a title is, I think it's like 60 to 70 characters is recommended for a title, or 50, I think it's 50 to 70 characters is recommended for a title. A meta description can be up to 160 characters, and we want to make sure the prompt we get back isn't too long. And yep, we're just throwing in the completion, and then when it runs, it just replaces that input. So there you go. Just with a little bit of code, some HTMX, and the OpenAI API, you can generate titles, slugs, and meta descriptions for your blog posts right inside your Django app.